I am the law, but this time in 3D. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss Dredd. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me today in the co-host chair, he's ready to dispense some justice. It's Justin Baker.
Thank you for having me, and just so you know, I'm ready and I look ready.
Yeah. I thought about actually doing that as part of your intro, so I'm glad you thought of that. So here we are. We are talking about Dredd, or Dredd 3D, as it is also titled. This was released September 21st of 2012. I actually was surprised. I didn't think it was that old, but
I thought it was just like 5 years ago.
Yeah, I didn't think it was as old as that, but 12 years old as of this recording, or almost 12 years old as of this recording. But it was directed by Pete Travis, who I always have to look up. Like, if I don't recognize the name, do I know anything else you did? And sure enough, I knew one other thing he directed, and that was Vantage Point in 2008. Do you remember the movie Vantage Point?
I've heard it, but I have not watched it.
Yeah, that was the one where there's this incident that occurs, and then you relive the same incident over and over again from different people's point of view.
Okay. It's kind of like a little bit like that Tom Cruise movie where he keeps dying over and over.
Well, kind of, yeah. But like I said, this one is just, you get different aspects. But yeah, it starred Matthew Fox and, my mind went blank on, I'm picturing other people in the movie, but Forrest Whitaker, several. It's not a bad movie.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen it, but I did know that one. I did not recognize really much of anything else he directed. I did discover that Duncan Jones was offered the directing job. Now, the name Duncan Jones I did recognize because he is the director of Moon. Have you ever seen Moon?
I have watched Moon. Yes, that's a good movie.
That's a very artsy movie, but a very good movie. But yeah, he also directed Source Code, a little bit more of a typical movie there with Jake Gyllenhaal. But like, for those of you who have seen Moon and Source Code, Duncan Jones wanted to make a very weird, a very dark, and yet a funny movie, which completely went against the writer's whole plan.
He wanted to redo the Sylvester Stallone one?
Oh, dear God. Let's not talk about that one during this. We're going to ignore that one, the 95 Judge Dredd, while we talk about this one. But the writer of this script was Alex Garland. Acclaimed writer. This is the guy that wrote 28 Days Later. He wrote Sunshine. He wrote and directed Annihilation. He also did Ex Machina.
That's good. Yeah, there's a lot of good movies.
I actually read a interview with Karl Urban, who of course is the star of this movie, who has actually stated that he believes that Alex Garland directed more of the movie than Pete Travis. And so even though Pete Travis gets the credit as director, it is said by many that Alex Garland should have gotten at least a co-director credit, but did not happen. I do want to ask, when was the first time you saw Dredd?
So probably a few years after it came out. So this was during a time I was living at home taking care of my mom. She had gone through some things, was kind of in and out of the hospital. And I remember my dad, after coming, spending a lot of hours with her in the hospital. Me and him always loved watching good action movies. And we had watched the Sylvester Stallone one when it was out. And I told him, hey, they got this new movie out, you want to watch it. And so me and him just rented it on, might have been Redbox or Blockbuster, wherever, somewhere. I don't remember. Yeah. And
Blockbuster would have been dying out around that time.
So maybe. But yeah, just sitting there watching a good old action movie with my dad.
Yeah, so I did not see it in theaters, but I got it pretty much right after it was released on Blu-ray. And again, we talked about that this is also known as Dredd 3D. It was during that, again, this is 2012, so it was right at that big hype of 3D movies coming out and all. And this one was, a lot of people talk about 3D and the fact that there are movies that are just made normal and then they use computers to convert it into 3D versus there are movies that were shot in 3D. Of course, Avatar being the first big movie, and the technology that James Cameron pretty much helped invent with the camera. This movie was, to my knowledge, filmed in 3D.
Yeah, I definitely would want to go and watch this in an IMAX 3D with surround
Yes.
sound.
So that was one of the main reasons I got it. Not just because, again, I was excited about Dredd's comic book movie, but I have because I still have it, a 3D television. And so I can actually buy a Blu-ray that has the 3D version on it, and I can watch it in 3D.
Do you need the little blue and red glasses as well?
No. This is the same glasses you use when you go to the movie theater. This is the passive 3D. It's not the active ones, because I don't know if you remember that. When the 3D TVs first came out, there were two different versions. There was an active 3D and a passive 3D. The active 3D required glasses that had to be like charged or had to have batteries, and they did like a flickering so that it would create the 3D effect. This was the same. The 3D of my TV is the same as you see in the movie.
Okay.
Like if you're watching it without the glasses, it's just blurry, and then you put the glasses on, it becomes 3D. I remember when my wife and I watched it, that we both were commenting that the 3D was amazing.
See, I haven't watched it in 3D, so now I want to go watch it in 3D.
But you just think of some of the scenes, especially the slow motion scenes.
Oh, the slow motion scenes are filmed so beautifully.
Yeah.
I mean, there's your artsy fartsy movie right there.
Yeah, there is a lot of beautiful imagery in this, as violent as it is.
And I can imagine the Gatling gun scene where, Mama's trying to just mow them down with 3 Gatling guns. I'm sure that in 3D is
well, even
amazing.
the shots where they're shooting down the corridor, that depth that you get, and I mean, if you listen to this, we're spoiling the movie, but even Mama's death at the end when she's falling, I mean, just imagine that in 3D.
Ooh, now you're making me want to go get a 3D TV.
I don't think they sell them anymore. That's the only thing. That's one of the reasons why I've held on to mine. Like if I want to see something in 3D, which I didn't watch this one in 3D when I rewatched it for the show, I thought about it.
Now, Hollywood, I demand Dredd back in theaters for 3D, and I demand a sequel as well while you're at it.
Yeah, they're still making 3D movies. They're still putting them in theaters in 3D. So why not continue making the 3D TVs? I just don't give us the option at least. But let's go ahead and get into the characters. We'll start off with Judge Dredd himself, here played by Karl Urban. And I did find out Karl Urban actually wanted to play the role. Like he was very interested in playing Judge Dredd, which you got to think is kind of a challenge for an actor, which is what Karl Urban said, because you have to be able to act without it seeing half of your face.
Yeah, it's what, his nose down. That's about it. It's
and
all
just
in
the
his
bottom
mouth.
part of his nose for the most part. Yeah. So you have to be able to act without the use of your eyes or much expression, which I will go ahead and say I absolutely love that he constantly kept the helmet on.
I was about to say, it's like I heard a story that he kept his helmet on almost all the time. Well,
that's because that's what it is in the comics. You have never seen Dredd's face in the comic books. Yeah, that was a big deal. Again, I said we weren't going to talk about it, but that was a big deal with Sylvester Stallone taking the helmet off, and he doesn't wear the helmet for the majority of the movie. That was a big deal.
It's also what happens. Sylvester Stallone wants everybody to see his pretty face.
Yeah. But Karl Urban did say that the most difficult thing, he, again, did find the acting a challenge, but he said the most difficult thing was actually maintaining the voice he chose to use for Judge Dredd. He, and this is a quote, he said it was like a saw cutting through bone.
Ooh.
That's the way he put it. But for those of you who don't know, Judge Dredd is a comic character who has been around since 1977. He debuted in a anthology comic titled 2000 AD. He did not appear in the first issue. He actually appeared in the second issue, and that was back in March of 77. He was created by John Wagner and Carlos Esquerra. However, Wagner actually quit before Judge Dredd's first appearance. So he did create the character. He is credited as the creator. But
Drop the mic and walked.
Yeah, but he was not involved in an actual Judge Dredd comic until issue 9.
Hmm.
And again, he debuted in issue 2. And the same thing happened for Esquerra. Esquerra did not draw the first appearance of Dredd. He wasn't involved with it. So the two guys who actually created the character are not involved with the character's first appearance, which is so fascinating to me. So, but John Wagner did serve as a consultant on the film, which I always appreciate when they get the actual comic book artists and writers involved. That is always great. What do you think of Karl Urban as Dredd?
Absolutely 10,000% much better than Sylvester Stallone. I need Karl Urban in 2, 3 more, Dredd movies.
Yeah, unfortunately, this movie did not actually do well. And so there was no green light for a sequel. Although Karl Urban, I think, I'm pretty sure I remember reading this, has said that he is game for doing it if someone wants to do another one.
Yeah. There's so many possibilities with how to do a Dredd movie.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like Karl Urban in this. I mean, this is not going to be... Unfortunately, I don't think Karl Urban, this will be one of those things where you go, yeah, that's one of his key roles. That's going to end up being... that's going to end up being like Bones from the newer Star Trek movies. That's going to.
And this was right after the Star Trek movies, wasn't it?
Yeah. He had already done a few things before this, and of course now most people are going to recognize him from The Boys. So
he's a more angry. What's his character from The Boys? Just doesn't talk as much.
Yeah. It's Judge Dredd and the Butcher from The Boys.
Yeah,
it's the same character.
Butcher, yeah.
Moving on, we got Judge Anderson, although it's just Anderson because she's not officially a judge, played by Olivia Thirlby, who I will actually say, I know most people will recognize her as Leah from Juno, Juno's friend, but I actually remembered that she was in another big 3D movie around this time called The Darkest Hour.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that? Did you ever see that one?
Juno, yes. Darkest Hour, no.
Yeah, Darkest Hour was weird. It was bad. But it was another one of those that was, big about the 3D, but it was about these electric aliens that were attacking Earth. And it was weird. But yeah, she was in that. But like I said, most people are going to recognize her as Leah in Juno. But her character is from the comics. Yep. She debuted in February of 1980 in 2080 number 150. She also was created by John Wagner, but with artist Brian Boland. And then she later got her own title. So there was a spin-off series with her titled Anderson Psi Division. And that debuted in 1988. But this version of her as being a cadet, because when she is debuted in 1980, in 2080, she is already a judge.
Okay.
There's no she's training, there's no she's a beginner or cadet or anything. She's already
police academy.
Yeah. And again, her getting her own division, the side division, her own comic, she's a full-fledged judge. It was actually when DC acquired the rights and did a really short run in 1994 of Judge Dredd. In that storyline, she's a cadet.
Okay.
So that more matches up with what we get in this movie of her being more of a trainee underneath Dredd. But yeah, so what did you think of Olivia Thirlby?
Her character at the beginning, I guess it kind of threw me for a loop. Her being, mutant psychic just kind of didn't seem to fit. Because you get the exposition right at the front about something going on, most of the cities in America are, behind a wall and giant cities and skyscrapers. And, they kind of tease you a little bit. And then, it's kind of like me and you were talking about earlier. There's a lot that goes on, but also not a lot. So it kind of threw me for a loop. And I didn't really like her character at first, but she gradually kind of grew on me.
Yeah.
And I actually kind of...
I think that's intentional.
Yeah. And definitely kind of about around the halfway mark of the movie, you're actually kind of rooting for her.
Yeah.
So yeah, she definitely grew on me.
And I think it's her story, and it's just Judge Dredd is involved, because she has the character arc.
Yeah,
She has the character development, and it's just that Judge Dredd is just a figure
yeah.
within her story. I do agree with that.
He's the Clint Eastwood mentor.
Yeah. All right, and then we have our big bad villain, Madeline Madrigal, aka Mama, or as it sounded a lot in the movie that they say Mama.
Mama. My
Yeah,
mama's gonna come get you.
but but here played by the wonderful and always a good villain, Lena Headey, who many might know as Cersei Lannister from Game of Thrones.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, more action related people might remember that she played Sarah Connor, not O'Connor, Sarah Connor on the TV show Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles. Not her first comic book movie. She was Queen Gorgo in 300.
Mm-hmm.
But here she was playing Mama. And I did find out that before she was casted, now Mama is not from the comic book, so this was a completely original character. Before she was casted, the plan originally was for Mama to be an obese older woman and that the actor would be under a ton of prosthetics. So I am so glad they didn't do that.
Absolutely. Because she just sucks all the energy. Like, you are so focused on any scene that she is in.
Yeah.
Like,
Again,
she
Lena
steals
Headey is a
everybody's
great
thunder.
actress. Yeah, she's a great actress, and she is great to see her here as a villain. I am so glad they went that route and didn't just do your typical, big burly mobster like, villain, male villain who's just tough for the sake of being tough. Like, I like that she was. I mean, here she is, a smaller woman, but she commanded the room, and you could
so
tell
absolutely terrifying too.
yeah, you could tell that all of her henchmen, if you want to say that, all the other members of the gang were terrified of her. And she was terrifying. And then we've got, again, nobody else is from the comic. I'll just go ahead and say that. The only characters from the comic are Dredd and Anderson. But the only other people I want to mention, first off, is Kay, the thug that is under Dredd and Anderson's custody throughout the majority of the movie. Played here by Wood Harris, who you immediately knew was who?
Old Julius from Remember
the Titans. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was like, went from all-American to drug pusher.
Yeah. More recently, people might know him as Little Duke from the Creed movies.
Mm-hmm.
And then, again, this one came first. But this isn't his only comic book movie. He also played Jim's partner, Gale, in Ant-Man.
Oh.
So Ant-Man's ex-wife's husband's partner.
Mm-hmm.
That's him. That's
I didn't catch that.
So yeah, if you go back, it's a small part in Ant-Man, but if you go back, he is the partner in Ant-Man. But yeah, here he is playing your typical thug here who thinks he's outsmarting the judges along the way, only to find out that he's not, and does the stupidest thing by trying to use Anderson's gun.
Yeah. Let me do all this stuff when I have a psychic around me that can read my thoughts.
But the other thing is they know so much about judges, and the fact that Mama even has 4 judges in her pocket.
Mm-hmm.
How do they not know that the judges' guns can only be used by that judge? Like, that it reads their DNA.
I mean, did you see the school that was in, Mega City 1? It didn't look like it was, the best public education. I mean, when 96% unemployment rate.
Yeah. And then the only other person that I felt was worthy to talk about is a character that has no name. He is literally just credited as Techie. And I don't know if I'm really pronouncing his first name correctly, but Domhnall Gleeson, who you also recognize.
Yep. He is one of the Wesley brothers or Weasley brothers. I'm
Yeah,
not the
he is
Harry Potter
Bill
aficionados.
Weasley. Yes.
And my favorite rom-com in About Time.
Oh yeah, I forgot that he's also in
Yeah,
that
where
one.
he's the guys in the family can go back in
Yep.
time.
Yep. I remember that. I of course I have kids, so I also recognized him as Farmer McGregor from the Peter Rabbit movies.
Okay.
So yeah. So but yeah, here he is in a un well he's credited, but again an unnamed role and just a little lackey who is pretty much being forced to help Mama. And but yeah, there you go. There's one of the Weasleys in this movie. All right, so is there anybody else though you thought is worthy to talk about? Because like I said, I didn't think everybody else was.
There's not any really characters that have a good amount of screen time. So
No, I mean even the chief judge that shows up at the end. I mean that's all there is to her. And when it comes to the four evil judges, I mean they were pretty much just, hey, we're just going to come in order to be killed.
Or her mama's right hand man that gets thrown from the ceiling.
Yeah, again, there's really not a lot. So we'll just stick with the 5 that we've talked about. And I will go ahead and ask you, as I always do. So of this cast, who do you want to see again, and who do you wish would take a slow fall down a skyscraper?
I definitely would like to see more Dredd. I mean, the movie is called Dredd, and like you said before, we really focus more on Anderson in the movie. I kind of would have liked to see more of not really the buddy cop, but that mentor-mentee relationship a little more. And I know me and you kind of talked about this before, but the movie goes by so fast. It's, an hour and a half?
Yeah, hour and 35 minutes.
They could have made this movie easily 2 hours. Like, I would have been glued to my seat watching it for at least another 30 minutes and kind of had more of that little bonding experience of, like I said, he's kind of that disgruntled Clint Eastwood character. He doesn't want to train her. But I definitely would have liked to have seen more of Dredd.
And who would you want to take the slow fall out of the skyscraper?
I'm going to say the slow-mo fall. I think I'm going to go with Kay.
Okay.
Toting him around for 20 minutes. And I just felt his character wasn't really used when, they have the drug bust and they're going to go interrogate him. And his character just felt useless for the, 10, 20 minutes until he tries to finally steals the gun. But that's 30 minutes later.
Yeah. So are you familiar with the phrase MacGuffin?
Yes. He's the MacGuffin. Yeah,
he's essentially the MacGuffin.
Plot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Pushes the plot forward, but other than that, he's completely useless. And they absolutely prove that. He is the reason why they decided to go after Dredd and Anderson, because as Mama says when he gets caught at the beginning, she's just thinking, okay, well, they executed him. Who cares? Mm-hmm. And then when she finds out they've taken him in for interrogation, she was like, okay, that's a problem. And so that's the only reason he's there. And then you think, okay, well, then he has to stay alive. But then you hit the point where Anderson just goes, I'll just read his mind and find out everything he knows. So she does that. And at that point, he is useless. Like, there's no reason to keep him anymore.
And then they still kept him.
Yeah. No, I will agree with you 100% on that. I'll go ahead and say I'd like to see more of Anderson. I mean, yeah, it's Dredd. Of course, we want a sequel, but in that sequel, I'd still like to see Anderson, especially now that she's a full-fledged judge. And I'd like to see, more of that, to say that relationship as partners. I'd like to see that play out a little bit more. So I am all for that as well.
Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and listen to an 80s Flick Flashback podcast once in a while, you could miss it. Do you love movies of a certain age? Do you miss the days of VHS tapes, VCRs, and the video rental stores? Does the thought of another 80s movie being remade seem inconceivable? My name is Tim Williams. I'm the creator and host of the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast. On each episode, I'm joined by guest co-hosts to discuss one of the many movies released in the 1980s. We share our first-time watch memories, our favorite scenes, and even learn some behind-the-scenes stories about the cast and crew along the way. New episodes are released every other Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. So make like a tree, get out of here, and go listen to an excellent episode of the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast. The ad is over. Go home. Go.
All right, well, let's get into the moving panels, what little there is, because really this just takes the idea of the comic, but does not use an actual comic story to tell this one. So I know I've already brought it up, but did you have any familiarity with the comic?
A little bit. I had, everybody has that one kind of weird comic book friend in grade school.
Wait, what?
And though, like Superman and your DC Marvel, those are like the normal comics. It's the kid who brings the.
So
dark
you're not
horse.
calling the friend weird. You're calling you're saying the friend
brings
knew
these
some
exotic,
of the more odd. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm with you now. Before you insult everyone who listens to this this podcast.
And so basically, he would just bring these comic books that no one had ever heard of. And I remember him telling me that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they're British comics.
Yes.
That were made
2000 AD was a British comic.
Okay. That were made about like American gun violence. And that Dredd is like a satire on American gun violence.
Yes.
And so he would bring, those kind of comics, and then he'd bring something else. So that was kind of my first introduction to Dredd. And I just love the costume on it. And,
were these colored comics that you saw?
That was a long time ago. Not that I remember.
They were black and white?
I believe so.
Okay, so you were seeing
like
some of the more...
This was elementary school. Like, you're sitting on your butt in line, waiting for the parents or the bus to come get you. And, people would just pass around comic books and read them.
So, yeah, you probably saw more of the traditional Judge Dredd. Because they have modernized them a little bit. And but, yeah, the original comics, the 2080 version of Judge Dredd, they are entirely black and white comics. But yeah, he 100% is meant to be a satire, which is, I think, something that obviously the 95 movie completely did not understand. I think this movie understands it a little, but I still also think that this movie didn't quite grasp the fact that, yes, it is supposed to be kind of a tongue-in-cheek expression of a vigilante almost like hero, but the vigilante that's working under the law. So yeah, I think there were times where it kind of got across, like for instance, when she reads Kay's mind and says he's thinking about reaching for your gun, and he just goes, yeah. And he goes, and he's changed his mind, and he just, yeah. I think there were moments. So, when he mentions that she's not wearing her helmet, and she says, well, the helmet can cause problems with my psychic ability, and then he says, I think a bullet would cause a bigger problem. So there was a little bit of that, tongue-in-cheek kind of humor in there. But yeah, no, absolutely. But the comic book is always set 122 years in the future. That is something that they have set. So that means when it debuted in 1977, it was set in 2099.
Gotcha.
So in 2012, if we're using that same logic, that means this movie should be set in 2134.
Okay.
Now, when they created the comic, it was actually the idea of John Wagner that the comic book would play out in real time. The stories would play in real time. So if you got a comic in March and then you got another comic book in April, it was supposed to be this is now happening a month later.
Oh, wow.
So with that being said, you have to ask, well, then how has Dredd existed for 30, 30 something years, almost 50 years as we're approaching.
Dredd Pirate Roberts.
Well, what they did was they explained it by he did age, and of course you didn't see, you never see his face, that he was aging, and then it got to a point where he had aged so much that the chief judges actually require him to go through this process. I don't know what it was called, but he goes through this process that essentially de-aged him.
Oh.
And then he gets another run. So essentially in the comic books, Judge Dredd is like probably 100 and something years old. Yeah.
He's immortal.
And is essentially immortal. But I will say he did in one of the early issues. I don't know if it was issue 3 or 4. It was very early though. He does take off his helmet, but they do not show you his face. He takes it off. They actually have a panel of his face, but they have like the censored bar over top of it. And the whole thing is the criminals who he takes it off in front of react as if his face is just horribly disfigured.
Oh gosh. I mean,
like,
that's what I would guess.
Yeah, they were like, with a face like that, we should just put him out of his misery and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But Wagner's whole idea of not showing Judge's face is for part of that satire. He believed that Judge Dredd represented the facelessness of justice.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it kind of reminds me, you're talking about like the faceless justice. It kind of reminds me of the symbol the courts use of blind justice. You know, holding a scale. She's got the kind of, I guess, headband wrapped around her eyes so she can't see. It kind of reminds me of that. I don't want my judge, jury, and executioner. I don't really want to see their face.
Yeah. Well, and that was my thought too, with the classic look of, the executioner from like medieval times, wore the hood. Yeah. Or even something like a firing squad. The fact that some of them had blanks in their guns, so you never actually knew who actually takes the shot, is involved in the death of the convict. So much of that, especially when it comes to the executioner part. Yeah, I totally agree. Let's see. Stuff that was from the comics that is in this movie. Of course, Mega City 1 is the actual setting of the Judge Dredd comics. In the comic books, because I don't think it's said in the movie or really shown in the movie, but in the comic books, it is pretty much the East Coast.
Okay.
Originally, when it is first shown, it stretched from Montreal all the way down to Georgia. Then later, it stretched all the way down to Miami and then as far west as Ohio. But then in 1982, there was a storyline titled The Apocalypse War. And during that war, the South is pretty much nuked. And so it is now barren wasteland, and the very, very upper north is lost in the war. And so, to my knowledge, the more recent and current version of Mega City stretches from Boston to Charlotte.
Gotcha. I believe in the movie there's a part on the map in their command center.
Yeah, I thought there was a map, but I can't remember if you could really tell.
If I remember right, it had kind of, they're just, talking about the city and crime, and there was a bunch of red dots. You had kind of a map of North America. Yeah. And it was mostly the Northeast. So I think kind of the U.S., like Maine, kind of maybe down to Pennsylvania, is what it looked like to me.
Yeah, because in the comic, there's just these big, mega cities. There's Mega City 1. I think there's a Mega City 2, but I think, or there's not a Mega City 2, but there's a Mega City 3, because I think Mega City 2 takes a different name, but I can't remember, but it's pretty much Mega City 1. But yeah, but then you also, just like this movie does, most of the population within these mega cities actually live in gigantic towers, known as city blocks. And that's pretty much everything they need is right there. Grocery stores, food, school, like you mentioned, like everything is in this one giant tower, and each tower contains somewhere around 50,000 people. So this movie did take that idea took
My
that.
question is if Atlanta has about 100 Peachtree somethings, how many Peachtree somethings are in Mega City 1? Because
Yeah,
this whole movie was in what, Peachtree Towers,
it's
Peachtree
it's
Corners,
peach. I will
Peach
say for us,
trees.
yeah, it's peach trees in the movie. Yes, of course, both of us being from around the Atlanta area, there's Peachtree Street, Peachtree Road, Peachtree Drive, so many different Peachtree in Atlanta. So that it is kind of funny to hear that. So yeah, you put them all together and build it straight up, and that's Peachtrees. There you go. Also, his gun, which is known as the Lawgiver, is straight from the comic books. It is a self-loading handgun. So you do see him put the magazine in, but I think when we're saying self-loading, it's like you see him calling for what type of round he wants. Like it sets the correct round.
Yeah, the gun was a huge draw with the Sylvester Stallone movie as a kid. It's like I can tell my gun what kind of ammo I want it to shoot, and
Yeah.
it'll do it. Like that sounds awesome.
And of course, to do that, it has a built-in AI. It has the palm print, which, as we see in the movie, self-destructs if someone else tries to use it. That is from the comics. In fact, that was established in issue number 24 in August of 1977. So, again, that is, even though there's no storyline, there are elements of the comic here. I will point out there are 7 types of rounds that have been revealed in the comics as being part of the Lawgiver, or at least 7 that I found. Of course, there is just the standard bullet. There is a heat seeker.
Yeah, was that the hot shot one, or is it actual heat seeker?
No, so this is an actual like heat seeker. Like this is where the bullet, the bullet would follow somebody. Also in the comics, which I really think there was chances to use this, but in the comic book there is a ricochet bullet, or a rubber bullet, but a deadly rubber bullet. So, like for instance, in that opening scene when the guy has the woman, held hostage, instead of shooting him with the incendiary or whatever hot shot,
I think that was the hot shot.
Yeah. If he had used the ricochet and shot the wall behind him, and it bounced back and hit the guy in the back of the head, I think that would have been cool. Of course, there is an incendiary bullet, which we do see Dredd use in this movie, that when he shoots it across the tower and sets all, it splits into all the different.
Oh yeah, it's
pieces,
like a flare gun that turns into more flare guns.
Yeah, and then of course as it hits them, sets them on fire. There is the armor piercing, which we see one of the bad judges use as he shoots through the wall and actually hits Dredd. Then there's the high explosive, which is the one Dredd uses on one of the one bullet he had left and uses it on one of the judges. And then, of course, there's also the stun, which we see Dredd use on those 2 teenage boys who try to take him out. Which I that's another thing I liked about the character, is that it showed that he is not without a conscience, which is, I think, one of the things that I partly think the Sylvester Stallone movie didn't quite get, that he is still quote unquote human.
He actually does have a heart.
Yeah, although again, I will get into the Sylvester Stallone movie did actually have it correct. They do reveal in the comic books that he and his brother, so again, we're not talking about the Sylvester Stallone movie, but that part of the Sylvester Stallone movie did come from the comic books. They were genetically created to be the perfect judge.
Gotcha.
So
it's been a long time since I watched that version.
And then of course the Lawgiver can switch from being automatic to semi-automatic. Yeah, so all of that. So we had that. Some of these bullets we got to see in the movie, and some of them we didn't. Then of course there's also the Lawmaster, which is his motorcycle. It was adapted a little bit. I will say the Stallone movie probably has it more comic book accurate, but this movie has it more realistic, to where it actually can be driven like a motorcycle should be able to be driven. But it also heavily armored. It is, as we also find out, it is AI controlled. as he tells it to warn
Oh,
off all of the crowd
the
control.
crowd control, that was hilarious to me. The kickstand activated, and then
Yeah.
when he tells it to do crowd control, it just says, "Please stand away from the crime scene."
Yeah. And I did find out that Karl Urban is the one writing it. So
Oh,
he
okay.
insisted that even though you wouldn't have known if it was a stunt double because of the helmet,
Yeah.
apparently Karl Urban insisted that he wanted to write it himself, and so he is the one writing it as far as my research told me.
Well, he is the law, so he gets to ride Lawmaster.
So what did you think about the fact that he actually says that line? That he does say, "I am the law."
I mean, to me, that's his catchphrase. That's what I remember him most of. Like, if somebody mentioned Judge Dredd, I just think the law. Like, I am the law.
Yeah, but tell me you don't, when you think it, you don't hear Sylvester Stallone with his, "I am the law."
I don't think I ever think of Sylvester Stallone saying anything other than Adrian.
Yeah, but he says this one in that same slur. No offense to Sylvester Stallone. Like, I understand. I know the story behind why he speaks the way he speaks, but yeah, the "I am the law." If I hear it, I am hearing Sylvester Stallone say it. But I do like that at least when he says it, it is more of a,
it's kind of more grizzled.
and more of a statement than a burst of anger, as it is with Sylvester Stallone. He's just letting you. He's reminding you in this one, "I am the law." So yeah, I did like that one. All right, let's go ahead and give our final decisions. Bag it, stack it, or trade. Again, this is a movie that is an hour and 35 minutes with the credits, so there's not an awful lot to talk about, and I think we've covered it all, unless there's something you can think of.
No, I mean, only other thing I can think of is there's just some things that I wish they kind of hit on more. I wish it was a longer movie, and that's really my only complaint. There is one scene I did think of, and you might be able to correct me on what I missed. But when he's in the phone booth and they're able to key in, they have the techie guy key in where he's at, and then they go swarm it, and he's not there. But how did they not know that he got out of the booth when they have techie looking at all the cameras? That's the
question.
one scene. That was the one scene that didn't get me. Is like, because they think he's still in there, and it's a dead body that they're shooting.
I mean, all I can think of is that a camera wasn't actually on the door to it, because otherwise, because think about it, the only way that Techie knew he was there was he had to use it. So it could be he was able to locate it, because if you also remember when Mama does the big shooting, when they cut to Techie, you're noticing a lot of his system is going down.
Out.
Yeah, the cameras. So that could also have played a factor here.
It just kind of confused me with the fact that they're able to look at almost everything, and then how is he able to get out of that phone booth? But then they have the scene still where the camera is showing the henchman.
But like I said,
circling.
maybe that camera is not focused on the door, or
True.
Again, Techie at that point may not have been at a computer, and we don't know what the limits of his technological, biological system part of him, what it actually can, do and see. We're never clear on that. So I will ask you, since you brought that up, like, is there a key scene, like a favorite scene, or a scene that when you think of this movie, that's the scene you think about? Is there?
I would probably say there's probably two. The Gatling gun scene where Judge and Anderson, or Dredd and Anderson, split up, and he goes down the hallway, and Mama sees him, and they just open fire, and it's just absolute mayhem. And then the scene of Dredd, fighting the other judges, and really probably Anderson fighting the other judge, because that was kind of hilarious to me. Is when the female judge says, like, "Oh, well, when she sees me, she's going to think I'm a friend. And
she'll hesitate,
She'll hesitate, and I won't." And then immediately the girl, the bad female judge, hesitates. She says, oh, I'm here to be a friend, and
Yeah,
then didn't shoot her.
gave Anderson time to read her mind, and then
Mm-hmm.
I
So,
had a problem with that. But I'll agree with you. The Gatling gun scene, I think, is a scene that I constantly think of. I'll be honest too. Mama's death, I think,
mm,
is a scene that when I'm thinking back about this movie, when he shoves her out the window and then her
mm-hmm.
starting to fall. Not so much her landing, but the actual just initial fall. Very reminiscent, I would say, of the comedian's death in Watchmen. Just
True.
that going through the glass and then the slow motion.
Really, any slow mo scene was just absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, I'll 100% agree with that. So I think we're gonna go ahead and get into it. So final decision: bag it, stack it, or trade it. Go ahead, Justin. What say you?
Ooh, this is a tough one. I'm stuck between a bag it and a very high stack it. And
Okay.
I
Well, maybe give your
feel
reasons, and that'll help you
uh,
decide.
so I want to say stack it a very high, like it's up near the top
Okay.
because one is too short, and I'm nitpicking here. I feel like they get through the tower too quickly. It's 1 second in the movie they're on the ground floor. The next
Yeah.
minute they're at floor 30
Well,
in
there
a
are
200
elevators.
floor. True, but it just felt too fast. I would have liked to seen, the struggle of, lugging all that gear up the steps and arguing and having Kay try to fight him a little bit and holler, oh, we're over here. The judges are here. Knowing that, they're not going to kill him. He might get punched a little bit. But I feel like I'm just going to go with a high, very high stack it. I think if it was the 3D version, maybe if I'd watched the 3D version, it might be a bag it.
Okay, so yeah, I will give you that. I'm also gonna say stack it, but I do think this movie is better if it is watched in 3D. I'm not gonna lie. Again, this is only the second time I've seen this movie.
Oh,
I
wow.
saw the movie originally and I saw it in 3D, and the 3D is gorgeous. I saw it this time and I watched it in 2D, and I will say some of it I'm just looking at it going, oh, I longed for those some of those moments to be in 3D. Of course, that doesn't affect the story. It just affects your experience watching the movie. I do think you get a better experience from watching it in 3D. I'll agree with you that it is short, but I don't mind that because I like that it just gets to the point and it just
Mm-hmm.
starts. I don't know how familiar you are with the movie The Raid, which is
Mm.
also a movie about a cop that's kind of trapped in a like an apartment building.
I feel like I've
Uh,
heard of it, but I know I definitely haven't watched it.
yeah, so it's a foreign film, but it kind of follows. A lot of people did a comparison there. It's not really the same, but I get the comparison. I will say I would have liked a little bit more, play with some of the stories. I probably would have liked a little bit more with the four judges that end up being, evil judges.
Mm-hmm.
I would have liked maybe a little bit more either backstory or setup or something with the four of them. Possibly even having one of them had worked with Dredd, like maybe
Mm-hmm.
maybe had one little moment at the beginning of Dredd and one of the other judges having a confrontation where they together took down a bad guy. I think that would have been better. Maybe even had Anderson speak to that female judge earlier in the movie, just even if in
Mm.
passing, like
True.
connected it a little bit more. Had those judges be a little bit more, oh wow.
Did you also get a sense that nobody likes Judge Dredd? That he's just a bad coworker, since they're so
Well,
happy to kill him.
but again, that's just you got to remember those four do say that's the reason why they're asking for 1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Is because they said, do you know which judge that is? So they do at least know his reputation and all. I will say that in the comics, Judge Dredd is very much known. Cops don't, not the cops, but the criminals hate it when they find out that Dredd is the one after them. Um, a lot of the other judges, do know that, hey, look, if this is too big for us, let's call Dredd. So, but again, and part of that is part of the satire that they're telling. Hey, we've got this, emotionless, like you keep calling him, Clint Eastwood type character, Charles Bronson, whatever you want to say here. But yeah, I don't mind the flow of the movie, but I just wish there was just a little bit more to it. I'm not saying I want it to go 2 hours, but I think you could have thrown in a little bit more and still kept it at the hour and a half mark.
Maybe take away so many of those scenes of just wandering the hallways. Because I felt there was a lot of that. Just, turn corner. It didn't really, there was no suspense or intensity to just wandering the building.
I think they did miss some opportunities with building some suspense or some, no pun intended, but build ups like some dread. Especially when it came to Anderson getting kidnapped. I almost, not to sound negative or anything, but or to really imply anything, but I really think there should have been more of them maybe torturing Anderson. To where you thought maybe she wasn't going to make it out alive. Yeah, but again, I'm going to stick with a stack it. I think it's worth the watch. It's not going to be one that you're going to, say, ooh, I want to watch that again, or at least you're going to, a lot of time's going to pass before you think, hey, I haven't seen Dredd in a while. I'll watch that again. You would definitely watch this one before you would rewatch the Sylvester Stallone one.
Absolutely.
I think. So... All right, but we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you, Justin, for joining me for this talk of Dredd. It has been a pleasure.
I did not dread it at all.
Ha Punny. All right, and thanks everybody for listening. Rate and review the show. We'll go ahead and wrap things up. For Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.